A dope courier for Jack Ruby informed a Louisiana State Police lieutenant and numerous hospital personnel of the planned assassination of President John F. Kennedy 2 days before he was gunned down in Dallas. That is the subtitle for this article, Rose Cherami and the JFK Assassination. Hello and welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. We are going through a really fascinating story related to the JFK assassination, like we often do. You'll want to go back. There's a couple of different playlists. If you've missed any of those, or if you're here for this and looking for more, there's playlists on my channel, so you can check those out. But today, we are going through the story of a woman named Rose Cherami. Rose Cherami had a list of many different names that she went by, actually. Here are, I'm just going to hold it up, a list of her various aliases, from Rose to Zeta, Melba, Christine. She had many different names. Her legal name was Melba Christine Marcadis. So she went through many different names, many different aliases, but the one that she's known by is Rose Cherami because she has a connection to the JFK assassination. Todd Elliott has chronicled many of the elements of the story. Here in his excellent book, you'll see I have tagged many of the references. And then we are also going to be going through an article in Crime Magazine that's by Don Folsom. Don Folsom, actually, when I went and looked at this website, he has many different articles about the JFK assassination that may be worth your time. So you may want to go do a search for that on your own, because he has gone through and chronicled many of the personalities, and his articles look fantastic. He did cover the Nixon White House for United Press International, and he's a widely published journalist. So his article, Rose Cherami and the JFK Assassination, is where we are going to start. It was written in March of 2009, and it opens up with her jail photo there. And one of the things that I've noticed about Rose Cherami is that her account is tainted with the descriptions of who she was. And by that, I mean, if we put ourselves back in the 1960s and you think about a criminal photo being the first photo most people encountered of her, and then mental case, that she had been entered into a mental institution where she was at the time of the JFK assassination. So that became one of the details that people were immediately introduced to her with that detail attached to it. She was also at times a drug runner, a dancer, an accused prostitute, and she was a single mom. So those things sort of taint her story, not for you and I, but because at the time that anybody heard about her, those details would have been details that would have discredited her. So we are going to listen to her story with those things in mind, and yet not let that taint her story. Yes, she was many of those things, and yet she has a story that's worth hearing. So we're going to listen to it now. A dope courier for Jack Ruby informed a Louisiana State Police lieutenant and numerous hospital personnel of the planned assassination of President John F. Kennedy 2 days before he was gunned down in Dallas. That is the subtitle for this article, Rose Cherami and the JFK Assassination. Here is the article. One of the most fascinating and underreported stories in the JFK assassination mystery deals with the Jack Ruby dope courier who accurately predicted the president's murder. 2 days before John F. Kennedy was killed in Dealey Plaza, 34-year-old Rose Cherami, a hooker, junkie, drug runner, and ex-stripper at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club in Dallas, was on a Florida to Texas heroin run for Ruby. So 2 days before the assassination, she's on a heroin run from Florida to Texas. In rural Louisiana, a violent, drunken argument with her two Ruby-connected male traveling companions broke out both inside and outside a seedy roadside tavern/house of prostitution. The argument continued during the next leg of their ride. Rose was tossed out of the gangster's vehicle and then run over by another car near Eunice, Louisiana. Okay, we need to stop right here because you guys may not care about this, but I care about it a great deal. My father was born and raised in Eunice, Louisiana. So when I heard, I'm sitting around researching, of course, and then I get to these pages in this book that mention Eunice, and it's even mentioned here on the back cover because the investigator actually is a Louisiana resident, and so he uses a lot of the Eunice connections to do his research here in this book. But I immediately took some photos and sent it to my mom and dad and was like, have you guys ever heard this name? Can you believe there's a Eunice connection to the JFK assassination? So Eunice, Louisiana is a backwoods little city that usually is never mentioned anywhere. But it is the heart of Cajun country in Louisiana. And so anyway, I was very surprised to hear it. She is on this drug run. She's tossed out of a car and run over. So let's see what's happening to Rose Cherami at this time. On the way to a nearby hospital, the cut and bruised Cherami, let's be real. She's been tossed out of a car and hit by another car, so it's amazing she's even alive. She told Louisiana State Police, Lieutenant Francis Fruga, I'm going to say Fruge, that her pending business in Dallas included picking up cash. This would be for the 8 kilos of heroin that she had been assigned to purchase in Houston. She said her fellow travelers were out to kill President Kennedy. At the hospital, she told doctors, nurses, and others JFK would soon be murdered in Dallas. After the crime that shook the world on November 22nd, 1963, and after Ruby had gunned down the alleged Kennedy assassin, Lee Harvey Oswald, 2 days later, Cherami told Fruge that Ruby and Oswald were such close friends, they were homosexual lovers. She said that Oswald had visited Ruby's striptease joint. 2 MCs at the Carousel Club had also spotted Oswald there, as had a sizable number of Ruby's employees and customers. I've read about Beverly Oliver. Leave in the comments anybody else that you are aware of that was at Jack Ruby's Carousel Club that says they saw Oswald there. I would love to know who else there was. Here we have 2 MCs and a sizable number of Ruby's employees and customers listed. In 1967, Dr. Victor Weiss, there are videos of this man, by the way, so if you want to verify these things, you can go and see videos of him talking about this encounter that we're about to read about. Victor Weiss, who treated Rose at the Louisiana hospital, told New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison's investigators he too had heard her predictions about the planned Kennedy slaying. And he confirmed that after Ruby shot Oswald, Rose had told him in the hospital that she had seen Oswald sitting with Ruby at a table in the carousel prior to November 22nd, 1963. So this is a state mental hospital that she had been taken to. It's about a 2-hour drive from Eunice. I looked it up, in Jackson, Louisiana. So she was found, taken to jail, and then because she was talking such nonsense, she was taken to the state mental hospital. So my understanding, I think it'll lay it out here, but is that she went from the hospital to the Eunice jail to this state mental hospital in Jackson, Louisiana. Another doctor at the same hospital, Wayne Owen, told the Madison Capital Times that he and other interns were told of the plot in advance of the assassination. Cherami even predicted the role of her boss, which would be Jack Ruby. Dr. Owen was quoted as saying that one of the interns was told that one of the men involved in the plot was a man named Jack Rubenstein. Owen said that when they learned that Rubenstein was called Ruby, they grew quite concerned. We were all assured that something would be done about it by the FBI or someone, yet we never heard anything. Lieutenant Fruge told the House Select Committee on Assassinations that Cherami seemed quite lucid during her talks with him. The panel found that Rose was without psychosis during her hospitalization, but that because of her withdrawal from heroin, she, quote, might have had mild integrative and pleasure defect, end quote. House investigators confirmed major elements of Cheramie's story, even key details of the drug run, giving her intriguing tale fresh plausibility among conspiracy theorists. While working for the Garrison investigation, Lieutenant Fruge tracked down the roadside bar where Rose Cherami and her fellow Ruby-linked cohorts had argued and tussled. Mac Manuel, owner of the Silver Slipper Lounge, once operated by Ruby, vividly recalled and verified the incident. He also picked out a mugshot of one of Rose's companions as Cuban exile Sergio Arcacha Smith. Okay, so during the Garrison investigation, this little roadside bar where they had had the tussle before this leg of the journey was tracked down. It was called the Silver Slipper Lounge. The owner, Mac Manuel, who admits that this particular venue had once been operated by Ruby, recalls and verifies the incident. He also picked out one of the companions in the car as a Cuban exile that we're about to read about. This man was named Sergio Arcacha Smith. Such a link would be highly significant, according to House assassination probers, who pointed out in 1979 that this man, Arcacha Smith, was an anti-Castro Cuban refugee who had been active in 1961 as the head of the New Orleans Cuban Revolutionary Front. This group, the Cuban Revolutionary Front, the CRF, was a CIA-backed outfit located in the same Camp Street building in the French Quarter where assassination suspects Oswald Ferry, Guy Bannister, and E. Howard Hunt hung out. So you have Oswald Ferry, the weird-looking guy, right? Guy Bannister, who was FBI guy, and E. Howard Hunt all hang out in this Camp Street building in the French Quarter, where this Cuban Revolutionary Front organization is. Arcacha Smith had also befriended this pilot, David Ferry, who was named as a suspect in the Kennedy assassination within days of the president's death. They did not know that Oswald and Ferry had been friends. Ferry and Arcacha Smith were also both believed to have had ties with the New Orleans organized crime figure, Carlos Marcello. Okay, so this person, Carlos Arcacha Smith, who she was in the car with, had connections with David Ferry. He was the head of the New Orleans Cuban Revolutionary Front, which was headquartered in the same building where Oswald Ferry, Guy Bannister, and E. Howard Hunt hung out. And they were believed to have had ties with Carlos Marcello. Unknown to the committee, the House Assassination Committee that gave this report, Ferry and Arcacha Smith were part of Marcello's underworld empire. Both Oswald and Ruby had ties to Marcello. This New Orleans godfather later confessed in prison that he knew Oswald and Ruby, that he had set up Ruby in the striptease club business, and that he, Marcello, had been behind the JFK assassination. So he confessed to being behind it, said he knew Oswald and Ruby, said he set up Ruby in these clubs, and also he had ties to this Arcacha Smith person who's in the car with Rose Cherami when she goes out into the road. The House panel, however, did not comment on a number of other equally important facts that had yet to surface or had escaped their curiosity. Marcello had once offered Arcacha Smith money in return for gambling concessions in a post-invasion Cuba. In October 1961, Arcacha Smith introduced Marcello, errand boy, and pilot David Ferry to Carlos Bringier. On August 9th, 1963, same year of the assassination, Oswald was handing out Fair Play for Cuba leaflets when he became involved in a fight, or a fake fight, with this Carlos Bringier. Oswald was arrested on August 12th, found guilty, and fined $10. While in jail, Oswald was visited by FBI agent John Quigley, and 5 days later, Oswald debated the Cuba issue with Bringuier on a New Orleans radio show. So this person, Carlos Bringuier, is connected also with Arcacha Smith, and Bringuier was in this fake fight with Oswald and on the radio program debating Cuba issues with Oswald, all in August of 1963. On November 26, 1963, Lieutenant Fruge tried to interest the Dallas police in Rose's astonishing tale, but they turned him down. Why would they do that? Why would they do that, y'all? Listen to all these details that we've heard. Even the fact that she knew about the assassination should be enough to make somebody go, we better track down that lead, right? We need to talk with this woman. We need to get a sense of, is she making this up? How many people actually heard her say this? Is this like an after the fact admission? Like, what's going on here? We need to track this down. Even if it's not one of the things you do on day one, it's definitely something you do in the first month, right? You send an investigator to talk to anybody who heard this woman, Rose, so that you can verify, did she even say this? If she didn't, we don't have to pay attention to it. But if 2, 3, or more people heard her say this thing, we better figure out who she's connected with, because this is an important lead. Anyone would feel that way. Anyone honest would do that job. When Cherami refused Fruge's suggestion that she talk to the FBI, she was released from the hospital, and Fruge went back to his regular police beat. JFK assassination expert Jim DiEugenio, writing in Probe in 1999, thinks the Dallas cops passed up a prime opportunity. Here is DiEugenio's assessment. So, just 4 days after the assassination, with an extremely and provably credible witness alive, with her potentially explosive testimony able to be checked out, the Cherami testimony was now escorted out to pasture. Eyewitness testimony that Ruby knew Oswald, that Ruby was somehow involved in an international drug circle, that 2 Latins were aware of and perhaps involved in a plot to kill Kennedy, and that Ruby probably knew the men. This incredible lead, the type investigators pine for, was being shunted aside by Dallas Police Captain Will Fritz. It would stay offstage until Jim Garrison began to poke into the Kennedy case years later. That's DiEugenio's assessment of the Rose Cherami witness testimony. The value she could have added to the case, the perspective she should have been able to share. On September 4th, 1965, less than 2 years after the assassination, Rose Cherami died in a car crash near Big Sandy, Texas, which is also out in the middle of nowhere in Texas. The Encyclopedia of the JFK Assassination notes that while her death certificate suggests she was killed at the crash scene, hospital records show that she might have been first shot in the head at close range. Quote, the driver said that Cherami was lying on the road, and although he tried, he couldn't avoid running over her skull. Although her death certificate reads dead on arrival, official hospital records indicate she was operated on for 8 hours after she arrived on a, quote, deep punctate stellate wound, end quote, to her right forehead, which could indicate a gunshot wound at point blank range. So this deep punctate stellate wound, they apparently couldn't discern whether or not it was a gunshot wound at point blank range or that the driver ran over her skull. In 1991, Rose would be portrayed by Sally Kirkland in Oliver Stone's JFK. So the editor notes that source documents include documents from the House Select Committee on Assassinations, articles from Spartacus.com, articles from the Mary Farrell Foundation, a Probe magazine article by Jim Eugenio in July-August of 99, Mafia Kingfish by John Davis, and the Encyclopedia of the JFK Assassination. So those are the things that were sourced for that article that we've just read from crime.com. magazine. So that gives us the overall view. Now we're going to get a few interesting details from this book before we wrap up our discussion. Vince Palamara did the foreword for this book. He writes, the assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22nd is one of the greatest tragedies in American history. In fact, the date is synonymous with 12/7/41, quote, a date which will live in infamy. He notes other dates as well that stand out in American history. When studying these subjects, it seems everyone is on a quest for the Holy Grail. In this case, a definitive smoking gun. This book contains one of those elusive smoking guns. A Rose by many other names, Rose Cherami and the JFK Assassination by Todd Elliott is a very worthwhile book. Do not let the relatively small size fool you, as good things do indeed often come in small packages. So I do want to point you to this. I will leave a link in the show notes where you can get this book. There will also be a link to this article that we've just read. But I am going to only read portions. You can read the whole thing and you can get the book at the link below. He is, just so you know, he is an investigative journalist of the Eunice News, and he has followed the paper trail to give us information about Rose Cherami, her story, and her life. He says, Rose was merely one of the many Louisiana connections to the JFK assassination. There are more plumes of smoke emitting from Louisiana in the fire that was the JFK assassination and investigation. He talks about Lee Harvey Oswald and his background in New Orleans. He talks about Jim Garrison, the Orleans Parish District Attorney, and the first and only man to bring a trial in the murder of President Kennedy. He talks about Clay Laverne Shaw of Kentwood, Louisiana. He was the man that Garrison brought to trial, charging him with being part of a conspiracy to assassinate President Kennedy. He talks about Congressman Boggs, other people that were associated, including Carlos Marcello. Marcello was an Italian mafioso who, it is believed, had motive to kill the president. And then there was Rose. She was a Texas girl who had become a lower-level operative, a mule, in the world of organized crime with drug and sex trafficking, possibly as far back as the late 40s. She was the woman who showed up, or didn't show up, in the pages of American history on November 20th, 1963. Okay, so that is the introduction that we get to Rose Cherami. He gives us the Eunice, Louisiana connection. He says, before President Kennedy met his untimely death, Eunice, Louisiana was where folks first heard Rose's truth about the assassination of the president on the Wednesday before that fateful Friday in Dallas. Mrs. Jane Carrier, the widow of L.G. Carrier, who witnessed Rose at Musa Hospital in Eunice and heard her say the things that she said, told the author, so that would be Todd C. Elliott, what she could remember, as it seemed to come back to her after publication. It came as a more detailed account of her husband's story. She said that two different individuals over a span of 25 or 30 years on two separate occasions came to the Carrier home seeking information about Rose. Carrier obviously was a person of interest. He must have been someone to talk to about a woman named Rose and that whole JFK thing. No interview of L.G. Carrier has ever been published. So this is all coming via people who heard these conversations, namely L.G. Carrier's wife. Another man appeared on the doorstep of the Carrier house sometime around 1976. Clearly he identified himself, though Mrs. Carrier could not remember who this mystery man was. She did recall, however, that he sat down on the couch in their living room and simply listened to what Mr. Carrier had to say about Rose Cherami and the strange events that led to the murder of the President of the United States. Mrs. Carrier said that the mystery man did not take out one pen or pencil, did not write down one note on a notepad, nor did he take any audio recordings. After hearing everything that Mr. Carrier could possibly remember, the man simply got up from the couch, said his formal goodbye, and walked out of their front door into obscurity. Later, Mrs. Carrier shared another memory about L.G. Carrier and Rose Cherami. Being a police officer, he was present at the old Eunice City Jail when Rose Cherami was brought in on November 20th, 1963. So that is who we are getting this information from, is the wife of the policeman who was there the day that Rose Cherami was brought into custody. According to Jane Carrier, LG confided in her that he would never forget the screaming, shouting, and animal-like sounds that Rose emitted as they forced her into a holding cell. LG told his wife that it took 2 men to put her behind bars as she was flailing, kicking, and dragging her heels. According to Jane Carrier, her husband LG said that at one point, Rose was just shouting out names of people. The author noted that it would have been interesting to hear some of those names that Rose was shouting in her state. Due to lack of documentation, one can only imagine that the names that Rose frantically spoke may have even had a familiar ring to JFK researchers some 50 years later. But Mrs. Carrier said that at the time, LG Carrier didn't really pay attention to the names that Rose shouted in the Eunice City jail. After all, everyone thought she was crazy or on drugs. The coroner was soon called in, and doctors would soon play a significant role in Rose's life. So she's brought from the hospital to the jail, and then they called the state police. It says, after the state police brought Rose to the East Louisiana State Hospital in Jackson, the memo concludes Dr. Weiss gave her a thorough physical and psychiatric examination and determined that she was a narcotic addict and was having withdrawal symptoms. She told him that she worked as a dope runner for Jack Ruby. I believe she also mentioned that she worked in the nightclub for Ruby and that she was forced to go to Florida with another man, whom she did not name, to pick up a shipment of dope to take back to Dallas. That she didn't want to do this thing, but she had a young child, and that they would hurt her child if she didn't. Okay, so that's the story in quotes in this memo that was taken in 1963. She also told Dr. Weiss that the president and other Texas public officials were going to be killed on their visit to Dallas. Dr. Weiss said that he didn't really pay much attention to a woman of this type until after the assassination occurred, at which time he went back to this woman who was still in the hospital and had further conversations with her. According to the memo, Rose claimed to have seen Oswald sitting at the same table with Ruby at one of Ruby's clubs, but did not elaborate any further. So one thing that I think is interesting in this memo is that she told Dr. Weiss that the president and other Texas public officials were going to be killed on their visit to Dallas. That's something new that I had never heard until reading this book. That actually her testimony was not just that the president would be killed, but that other Texas public officials, which of course is interesting because think who else was shot that day. It was Governor Connolly. And think about the quote. The very last thing he said is supposed to have said in the car. My God, they're going to kill us all. Who's they? Why isn't it? Oh no! Get down! To me, his quote has always seemed like there's insider knowledge there. But regardless, Governor Connolly was one of the men shot. Other Texas public officials. That's very insightful, isn't it? Do you think so? Another curious clue in Garrison's Rose Cherami file is a handwritten letter by an unsigned author. The letter dated July 29th, 1967, so this would have been after her death. It read, "Notes on a case in Cherami Hospital, New Orleans, Louisiana. On July 4th, I met a young woman from a small town in East Texas who told me this tale. She heard it from a doctor in Shreveport who also practices in New Orleans. On November 22nd, 1963, early in the morning, a woman brought into Cherami Hospital was in a deplorable state, suffering from exposure, beating, etc. She was unconscious, probably under narcotics. Later in the day, she revived, and the intern told her that John F. Kennedy had been assassinated in Dallas, and a fellow named Oswald had been picked up and charged with the killing. Her reaction was, did they get Ruby too? No one thought much of it until Sunday, when Ruby shot Oswald. The woman had been discharged by then, and when the FBI was told of this, they could not find a trace of her. So much for that. So that is interesting. That was that woman Rose? Who, if not, who was that woman? But it sounds like Rose, except it's in Cherami Hospital. in New Orleans. So that's all very interesting. Something interesting about this book is that he gets way into the details of this area and its connections to Lee Oswald. So again, if you're interested in the JFK assassination, you may be interested in this book. It goes into Oswald's connections with Eunice, with Mamu, with the area, which is where some of the Bay of Pigs trainings had happened. So there's those connections. Here is a photo of Rose in the 1940s. That is what she looked like. A young Rose. So that is the basic information that's given about her initial testimony. It was given multiple times to multiple people, and then less than 2 years later, she died. It was not investigated by the FBI that we have record of. So the account now is something that researchers are interested in, but that no investigator got to dive into. Well, we're going to read a little bit about her death from this book before we close out the story of Rose Cherami in this episode. It says, just as her life was shrouded in mystery, so was her death. It seems that Rose left the surreal in her wake. On September 4th, 1965, as Jack Ruby sat in a Dallas prison cell for the murder of Oswald, Cherami was again hit by a car, or at least found on the side of a highway. This time, the injuries proved fatal. Her death certificate read that she was found dead outside of Gladewater, Texas, apparently after she had been walking on Highway 155, about 1.5 miles east of Big Sandy, at 2 a.m. In fact, when she was found, she was still alive and breathing. According to some accounts, at 2:15 a.m., Jerry Don Moore of Tyler was driving out of Big Sandy down a stretch of Highway 155 that he had also driven down 15 minutes earlier. He saw something strange in the road that hadn't been there 15 minutes before. Moore recalls seeing 3 or 4 suitcases laid along the yellow line in the middle of the road. He swerved to the right to miss the luggage. That was when he noticed the woman lying on the side of the road. All of this was verified by Moore himself in a published 2010 interview for Lagniappe magazine, a bi-weekly free tabloid based in Lake Charles, Louisiana. So that is an updated piece of information in this book that wouldn't have been known back in the 60s, that Moore himself verified these things in 2010. He says, so this is Moore speaking, it looked like she was sleeping. She had her arms folded under her head like she was sleeping with her elbows out. She was laid out parallel to the highway on the right-hand side, and she wasn't in the road. Maybe her elbow was, but it was just barely in the road. She was more in the gravel between the highway to her left and the grass and the ditch to her right. Reacting quickly so as not to hit this person on the side of the highway, Moore said that he slammed on his brakes, which banged under his car's chassis twice as he swerved. I know I didn't hit her. I ran off into the ditch and finally got my car up out of the ditch and back onto the road. And then I went to check on her, and she was still breathing, but very short breaths, and then she would stop. And that's when I noticed tread marks on her arms. But the car I drove then had bald tires with no treads. It looked like someone else had run over her. Moore was asked whether he thought the mysterious positioned pieces of luggage in the middle of the highway were strategically placed with the intention of forcing a motorist to swerve and hit the laid-out Cherami. Hell yeah, as night is night and day is day, you could tell it was a setup to run over that woman, he said. It looked as if someone had done this sort of thing before. Moore admitted to doing 70 to 80 miles per hour and drinking his libation of choice. He also admitted to trying to assist this barely alive Rose Cherami. After he grabbed her under her arms and loaded her body into his back seat, Rose said, he then drove her into town for medical attention. He stopped briefly in Hawkins, Texas, where he was told by a policeman that the nearest hospital was in Gladewater. So the policeman offers a police escort, and they go. The doctor gave her a couple of shots and told him that she was suffering from brain damage. I was concerned, said Moore. I was scared, and I didn't hit her, nor did I expect any of this. I just really wanted to get home to Tyler that night. But he didn't drive back to Tyler immediately. He waited until the ambulance came and followed it to the hospital. He then goes back. He thinks because there's no ID, he said, I thought I could help identify her. So I went and I got her luggage for her. I did go through some of the luggage to look for a name or an ID. Then I brought the luggage back to the hospital. He said he figured that she was a whore because of the fact that he found a douche bag or a hot water bottle in one of her suitcases. He explained that it was a telltale sign of a prostitute. It's alleged that at some point, Cherami remarked to one of the ambulance crew or hospital staff, I worked for Jack Ruby. Perhaps Rose thought that it was important enough that people should know about that in her last breath. So that was the last thing that she is reported to have said. We are given a look at her gravestone, which does have her legal name, Melba Christine Youngblood Margadis. And then we are also given this image of her, which it says, this is how most of the world for years has seen Rose Cherami. It's her mugshot, the final picture that was connected with her. She had been arrested for drunk disturbing the peace. I have to tell y'all, in the final chapter of this book, there is some information that is fascinating. I don't want to give away the details and treasures of this book, but I was really surprised. He talks about newspaper reports that were printed that he has evidence of that I had never heard about, that were printed about the JFK assassination that gave information that is different from what is commonly known. So if you're interested in the JFK assassination, you're going to want to get a copy of this book, A Rose by Many Other Names, Rose Cherami and the JFK Assassination, Todd C. Elliott. So between the article that we read and the book that we read, there's some things that are interesting about Rose Cherami. The fact that she knew in advance about the assassination, of course, is shocking. That she was thrown out of a car, that she was on a known drug run that was provable and was verified. That she was connected to all of these people and places. She knew Jack Ruby. She had seen Lee Oswald. Apparently, between the 2 days, between when JFK was shot and Lee Harvey Oswald was shot, she asked the nurse, did they also get Ruby? Which is interesting because Ruby then went on to kill Lee Oswald. So many fascinating things about Rose Cherami. Let me know in the comments what you noticed, what stands out to you, what stands out as worthy of discussion, worthy of our conversation in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. And if you have any other links, books, interviews, things we need to know related to Rose Cherami, please leave those in the comments. I love the comment section for that reason. So many of you inform me about things I never knew about. So let's learn together. I enjoyed this discussion with you. I was glad to get to understand more about Rose Cherami. I hope you have a great day.